Hello and welcome to the 21st Century Work-Life podcast, where we talk about leading remote teams, online collaboration, and working in distributed organizations. This podcast is brought to you by Virtual Not Distant, where we help managers and teams transition to an office-optional approach. Find out everything we do over at virtualnotdistant.com and check out our show notes and pictures of our lovely guests over on the podcast page. It's great to have you here, listeners. Let's get on with the show. Hello and welcome to episode 263 of the 21st Century Work-Life podcast. And this is a What's Going On episode, and we're recording on the 9th of February 2021. And when I say we, I mean Maya Middlemiss. Hello, Maya.
Hello, Pilar.
And myself, Pilar Ortiz. And we've been trying to keep these What's Going On episodes where we cover different articles we've seen on the news and some tech news and also what's going on at Virtual Not Distant and in our network. We've been trying to keep them as evergreen as possible, but I think today is quite time specific. But I think also with a view to the future. So we're in a strange time space, just like everyone. So we're going to talk about how remote work is being experienced right now, even some of what the practices that are emerging, and also how the tech we've known and loved for ages is evolving. We've got a lot here for you listeners. So remember virtualnotdistant.com if you want to send us a long form message, or indeed tell us of an article that you think would be of interest to us and to other listeners. And of course, our Twitter handle is @virtualteamwork with a 0. So Maya, something that's been on my mind for ages, and I know by talking to other people, they've been thinking the same, like Teresa Sigilito, I was talking to her the other day. And what this is the fact that everything that is happening in the world of work because of the virus, because of Corona, is often being viewed as something that can be addressed when we're looking at remote work. Have you been hearing this as well?
Yeah, and it's kind of all tied up with the negativity around yet another lockdown and what that means. And it's a shame to see everything connected to remote work when there's so much more going on.
Yeah, so it's happened a few times when I've spoken to people that they've talked about, for a start, the whole working from home, which is, as we know, it's always been the most popular way of working remotely. But of course, now it's got all the added challenges that seasoned remote workers working from home didn't have. And even actually seasoned remote workers now have, because the home situation has changed. But of course, there's also the having to be at home. So we can't use the outside world also, which is something that, of course, we weren't used to in the remote space. Or some people have been made redundant also. And there's also the fear of redundancy. There's the businesses that are shrinking. There's the nature of the work for some people has changed. I know my husband, for example, he usually works in a workshop he does some digital stuff, but his presence is in a workshop, using the workshop, and now he's home and he's had to change how he supports his students. So there's all of this, and sometimes I'm thinking we can't address that through the lens of remote work. So I was very pleased to see that we could talk about this, not just as a rant, but by referring to an article that Mandy Garner published on workingmoms.co.uk, and it's called "Pandemic Working is Not Remote Working." And I wanted to particularly highlight, just to go back of what the article is, it basically reflects a lot of what we've just said. And I particularly like this quote, which said, Bloomberg reported that the move to remote working has meant longer hours have become the new normal for many in the US and other countries. So that is something that we need to be looking at the longer hours, and that the number of hours people are logged on has fallen back towards pre-pandemic levels only in Belgium, Denmark, France, and Spain. So it sounds like Belgium, Denmark, France, and Spain have said, look, we worked way too much during those times. Let's not let that become the norm.
Yeah, and some of those countries are introducing legislation to actually protect that right to log off and disconnect and not make this the norm.
Yeah, France already had that. So you're right, I hadn't thought of that angle. I'm surprised by Belgium because the last episode, the What's Going On in Belgium with Vivian and Bart, Vivian said that actually that Belgium wasn't really moving forward with remote work, but she also said that remote work was being confused with all this other stuff that was happening. So, but interesting that they've actually recognized that it's brought a work practice that we don't want to see in the future.
Yeah, and that this is not what remote working is all about. And I think maybe there was a sense with the first wave of lockdowns that this is an emergency and we'll just power through it and we'll do whatever it takes to do our homeschooling and do our work. But now there's a sense that things have settled into a routine that was built out of an emergency. And that's not okay because people can't carry on like that indefinitely.
Yeah. And I hope that this is something that everyone is looking at, both at an individual, team, and organizational level. But it's really hard because exactly of all the things we were talking about, like who's going to flag it? The person who thinks, actually, is my job going to still be there in 6 months? Are they the person who's going to flag that they're overworked and that they're working too many hours? And also, if it means that productivity is still fantastic and we're still going, who's going to be the senior person to pull back on that? So I think it's a real collective responsibility. And in the article also said, I think this was referred to something I saw in The Guardian recently, workers in the UK were among those who were logging on for an extra 2.5 hours from home in the pandemic. Which also, that 2.5 hours to me is commuting time, which is something I've heard before pandemic, when companies had decided that people could work from home or they should work from home. And people had said to me in workshops, well, I've noticed that I wake up at the same time because that's the household schedule. And I don't have a commute to go to, so I start working. So I'm just working more hours.
Yeah, that's not so good, is it? Mind you, a lot of those people probably were working during their commute. Has definitely been a trend that we've both observed and talked about in recent years, that they were hanging on the train with their phones and even laptops a lot of that time. But surely remote working should be about reclaiming some of that autonomy and choice. Even if we haven't got a choice to leave our house, then we should be able to start work at a more civilized time.
Well, as long as it's by choice and not by inertia or fear, I think that you can, some people might be delighted to be able to use those hours for whatever reason. But as long as it's being done because there's a decision and a conscious decision behind it. And there's also maybe there's a question that people haven't had time to ask themselves. I know I'm working longer hours. I'm actually at the computer much earlier than I used to. Yeah. Just because the work is there, but that's fine. I'm conscious of that. And also because I have my own schedule, then I decide to catch up on Friday, for example, with my other time. That's not work.
And it is a bit different when you work for yourself, in terms of who's expecting you to put that time in or who you're accountable to. I think it's can easily get a bit unhealthy when people are thinking they've got to show up at work early because of the general sense of economic uncertainty and global uncertainty. And they're not quite sure sort of who they're competing with to be visible against. It can very quickly get out of hand if it's not managed well.
And I think if we are in a position of authority and we want a healthy, sustainable, remote work, a friendly culture, we can remind people of that there are some free hours in the day that have been freed up because of the commute, and that those can be reclaimed in a different way. Like you were saying, Maya, they can be hours that can be used for other things that we didn't have time for before. So I think it's for people who are okay to instigate the conversation, I really think it's worth keeping that conversation going, because sometimes people are not going to even have time to reflect on it. So, yeah. And you had, of course, this whole thing, I think it has almost come back in full circle, because Maya, you wrote a blog post in your healthyhappyhomeworking.com site about what happened right at the beginning, and that the fact that this is not what you were talking about when you were working, when you were saying for years that working from home was so great.
Yeah, I mean, it's not surprising that this message is echoing from everybody who's ever advocated for the benefits of remote work, that this isn't what we meant. And, it's just really sad that for so many people, their only experience of working from home has been in these really strange, distorted circumstances. And we're out of the emergency, everybody's in it together mindset, if we ever had that or believed that. And now for a lot of people, it's just become a depressing grind, and this still isn't what we meant.
So hopefully some people have adapted and have had the time and the headspace as well, amongst everything else. And also I think a lot of people can see now where the sustainable practices are, the ones that are context specific for now. So hopefully we start to massage that in that way. But I think that, yeah, like you say, for some it won't have been a good experience. There's something else that came out. It's kind of around this. So it's around the theme of conversations that I'm glad are surfacing. And this was an article that was shared on my LinkedIn feed by Dr. John Hopkins, and it's called "Older Employees Are Adapting to Remote Work Better Than Younger Workers." And this is, again, a conversation that we need to be remembering that needs to keep resurfacing, because especially pre-pandemic, actually more than now, the rhetoric was always that young people adapt better to remote work, that they find it easier because of some of them might be digital natives, etc. And we've always known that socialization is really important in younger years, and therefore sometimes it is more difficult for young people. So I was really glad that this is resurfacing. Sad that it's resurfacing, because, of course, the whole situation is really affecting young people, not just regarding working from home, with just the social, because all our social physical ties have been cut. But they were talking about productivity and how some workers feel more productive. And then the report also, the Nintex report, which is where the data comes from, it found that only half of younger employees felt productive while working from home, compared to 80% of older workers. I thought that was an interesting a piece of data.
Yeah, it all comes back to this issue of choice again, doesn't it? Because previously, people who worked from home generally did it because they'd requested it or they'd oriented their life that way. And for those younger people who were working from home, it was because it supported the lifestyle or the career or the culture that they were in. And for lots of others, there are so many potential causative factors here, like simply not having private space or comfortable workspace at home and things like that. Whereas maybe older people are more likely to have that lifestyle that accommodates a spare room or a spare desk at home, and simple things like that. So it does all seem to come back to whether you had a choice about it or not at the outset. And that's the new variable this year that we're starting to see showing up in these research trends. And it will be really interesting in a few years' time, hopefully, when we're back into something more hybrid and sustainable, to look back and see how do people feel about those choices now.
And I think it's also worth remembering that younger workers are learning more. They're still really learning. Well, when we're old, we still learn, but I hope listeners, you might know what I mean. And a lot of that gets absorbed by what we see around us. A lot of the structure to the work comes from the cues of being with others, because also part of that socialization. So the younger worker, as well as having maybe, we're assuming very broadly, maybe less means to be comfortable working from home, they're still in that development. They're still, I don't know, when I was young, I did a lot of studying, but I know that how I was then is very different to now. My approach to work is very different to now. My confidence is I've always been ultra confident, but really deep down, my confidence now to get on with stuff. My network is much larger now. So if I need anything, I can pull from a range of people. I can just pick up the phone or email or whatever. Whereas when I was younger, my network was the people around me. So there's all of that I think also as we move forwards, there's all these things that these problems shouldn't just be problems that we highlight now. They should be red flags for the future also.
Definitely. And thinking about what you're saying about when you were younger, the other thing work provided for me, as well as that social and that network, was the structure of kind of getting up and working in the morning and, going to a particular place to do it. I think that was much more important to me in an earlier generation, certainly before I was a parent. Impose that external structure on the day, and for a lot of people, obviously that's completely missing now, and that's bound to lead to a sense of disconnection and not feeling as productive or focused.
Yeah. I can hear a dog in your neighbor got a dog.
I'm sorry, suburban life. We've got
nice,
the hedge cutters and we've got the dogs. We don't have dogs, but we have neighbours on 3 sides with dogs. So they have their sort of work from home network where they communicate, but they don't have email or Slack or anything. They just one sets off the others and off they go.
Oh, that's great. Just thought I'd check. You did have a new.
Yeah, no, it's not here. I do get used to it and tune it out a bit. Sorry about that, listeners, if you're enjoying the conversations with the local hounds.
So I think that's important too, as we move to the future. And a lot of organizations are saying, lots of other people want to continue to work remotely. Just remember, especially if your workforce is not predominantly made of young people, that the young people in your workforce, when you go to a more flexible approach, that they don't miss out on a lot of stuff. So I think just to bear it in mind, there's no right or wrong way to go about it, but we need to bear it in mind. So that's a very good visible lesson, I think, that this pandemic has brought in the context of remote work and specifically working from home. Shall we move on to the next bit of articles? Let's go. This is where I wish we'd had like an airplane sound, so we could say "let's go" and then "shoo," because this is something we've had similar articles before. This is called "Hawaii's Remote Work Program Comes with Free Flights." And
wow, yeah. Well, Pilar, I feel that as a member of the Virtual Not Distant team, I need to step up and volunteer my services, take one for the team. And if you want me to check this out in a little bit more depth, then just say the word and I'm there.
All expenses paid. Well, free flights.
Bring it on.
Hey, if you're offering that. So this is actually an article from the 9th of December of 2020. By the way, sorry, I didn't make reference to the dates of the previous ones, but they were January and February 2021. And this comes from Condé Nast, the Traveler, their online magazine. And again, it's a nice change in the view of the world and saying, yes, you can work from Hawaii. It's got lots of conditions to it. So which is interesting because I think they're saying mainly you've got to be employed, although they're considering freelancers also. So they're going for a very specific profile.
They want you to bring the income to the island, don't they? And, bring your work rather than expecting to find it locally.
Yeah.
And it was a fairly limited contest, I think. It wasn't free flights for everyone.
Yeah, but I think they'll open it. I'm sure they'll open it up when they realize that some digital nomads probably have the economic wealth to come and contribute a lot to the place. I really like this bit. In exchange for the opportunity to live, work, and play on some of the world's most beautiful islands, participants are required to contribute their time to local nonprofits for several hours each week.
Brilliant.
I'm not sure I like the having to do that specific, but of course, how you contribute, hopefully you can have a lot of choice. But like you say, I think it's really nice to say, we want to build a better place for you, but we also want you to come and make life better for us also. Like, it's not just tourism.
It is. And a lot of the stereotypes, which do have a lot of truth about the whole digital nomad idea of you drift around your beautiful countries where there's a much lower cost of living, and a lot of people stay in co-workings and they don't contribute to local taxes and the economy, and they live in very much a digital nomad bubble rather than contributing to the local economy. And it's good to see one of those economies saying, okay, we've got the beautiful beaches and the environment that people want to come and spend time in, but we expect something back in return. And if you were living there as a resident, then you would be paying tax and social security locally. They clearly recognise that most people coming for a shorter term aren't going to do that. So they're finding other ways for people to contribute and put back. And I think that's fair enough.
Yeah. It reminds me also of Nomad City. Well, the new rebrand, actually, I'll talk about that in a second. But when we spoke to Nacho from Nomad City, now Repeople, I think it was last year, 2019 on the podcast. And he was saying that one of the reasons why they wanted to attract digital nomads who would stay for a while was because they preferred that kind of tourism to the usual tourist that goes to a resort and doesn't leave the resort and doesn't use the island. So I think it's quite nice that classic tourist destinations are also thinking about their own sustainability and what's best for them also, and how they can bring people that are going to bring a lot of value in other ways other than cash in certain places.
Yeah, people who'll go to the bars and restaurants when they're open again, people who go to the beaches, the local retailers and so on. And actually, even if you're not putting down permanent roots in a community, you can still be a part of it and contribute to it in lots of different ways. You don't have to be just passing through in an isolated little bubble of a digital nomad hangout.
And it reminds me also of the conversation we had with Tracy from Grow Remote, again, I don't know, 2019, where she was saying that if you have when she was talking specifically about Ireland and saying when you have people who are remote workers who are working for companies outside of the country where they live in, that also brings a different perspective in some way into the local area, because you're mixing with people who are not from that local area. So if there can be some cross-fertilization, cross-pollination of ideas in that way, I think that that can enrich. It can have a ripple effect beyond just the remote worker.
Definitely. It enriches the whole community. And actually, when you look at articles like this, it might think, well, actually, I probably can't just up sticks and go to Hawaii for 6 months. But it does make it settle on my radar as somewhere that embraces that kind of international discourse and makes remote workers welcome. It's a bit like my e-residency in Estonia. It kind of shapes almost the national consciousness that this is something we want people to come. We embrace people from all different cultures, and it does make you kind of slightly more aware of that when people are thinking about where they might want to live or work, or even just go on holiday one day when we can do that again.
Great. So it's wonderful that the pandemic has opened up this conversation. The pandemic is not wonderful, but the fact that,
but it's changing things. And if people are leaving all the big cities and they're all getting hollowed out, these people have to go somewhere to live and work.
So just another nod to Gran Canaria Nomad City. Nacho has rebranded now Nomad City, and it's worth checking out their website. Maya, you will put a link, won't you? Because I'm sorry I didn't bring the URL with me today.
Yes, no, I'll be glad to take another look at that because it's a lot nearer than Hawaii.
Great. So those are the big, wide conversations. These are the really exciting conversations. But of course, there's been stuff that's also been happening at a more granular level in a way. So, and this is the tech conversation, which is, of course, always linked to remote work, although we know it's not about the tech, but the great accessible tech has made it possible for everyone to have a choice when they have a choice and to be able to do something that looked like what they used to do now that they have been forced to work away from people. So there's an article that Richard McKinnon shared with me, and I covered it with him in episode 81 of My Pocket Psych, which actually I think comes out on the same day as this episode. And it was a about a piece of tech that was trying to solve a problem in, I don't know, well, it'll be interesting to see what happens with this. So listeners, you might have come across it. I definitely saw this shared quite a lot on my own LinkedIn feed. And it was on the bbc.co.uk, maybe even in .com, I'm not sure, over on the 18th of January 2021. And the title says, a wristband that tells your boss if you are unhappy. And this is about exactly that. It's about a wristband that you put on your, it's called a Moodbeam, and it allows your employee to track your emotional state. And basically the idea is that you press, it's got two buttons. One is yellow. You press the yellow one if you're feeling happy, and you press the blue one if you are sad. And I'll quote, aimed at companies who wish to monitor the well-being of staff who are working from home. The idea is that employees are encouraged to wear the wristband, they can say no, and press the relevant button as they see fit throughout the working week. So, and managers have a dashboard where they can have a look at this. What did you think, Maya?
Yeah. We were talking about this in Healthy, Happy Homeworking a few weeks ago, and I'm still struggling to kind of see why you would put this app and this wearable device into this conversation. And if you want to know how your team is doing, why can't you just ask them? And the idea that they've got to wear a thing and then remember to do this, particularly if they're having a bad day or something, I think I can see the intention is good, and that it might be useful in aggregating data across a large organization or to track changes over time. Like you could note that morale is declining or around certain periods of the work and so on. It might be valuable. But I suppose I'm concerned that on a team basis, when it's a manager and the people that report to them, that it could get in the way or be seen to substitute for what should really be a much more deep and nuanced conversation about how they are.
I agree with everything. And actually, I've just realized that I really hate this idea, and I've now understood why. So when I discussed it last month with Richard, I was like, shouldn't we have a conversation? And of course, we suggest that people check in with their moods if that is something that is useful to them every day, with something as easy as a channel in Slack or whatever, or a round in a meeting. So that is good. It's good that we're saying people have feelings and people feel happy or unhappy. I've just realized my big problem with this is that you wear it on your person. And for me, the separation between work and personal life is that work is something that's outside me and I go to. Yeah. I don't need to go to an office, but I go to my computer. And of course, my brain is my work and my work is my brain. Yeah, I've got that. But I can say, now I'm doing this, now I'm doing that. Or now I'm going to connect with my work colleagues, which can also be my friends, but maybe I'm going to talk to them about work. Something that is on my person is already starting. Now the boundaries are kind of, and actually, I just don't like that. I've just realized that. I don't like that.
It's all of those boundaries are under threat from technology at the moment, and particularly when that technology is being put into people's homes. And this is one more kind of erosion of that, I think. And it's also just kind of relegating that conversation about emotions outside of the business tech. It's like saying you need a separate thing in order to talk about how you're feeling. And maybe
you're right.
It would make it less emotionally safe or psychologically safe for people to say in their morning check-in, I'm having a really bad day actually, because you've got this thing on your wrist that you can use for that now. So why are you bringing this messy stuff into the conversation? No, I think we're both reacting quite negatively to this. We should be pressing our not happy buttons right now.
At the same time, one thought I've just had, although this would be really much more expensive than some other kind of survey, because we've already had like Melanie Pershell, I think that's how you said her surname. She was on the show talking about, I think it was called Team Mood, or I can't remember the name of the app.
Yeah, there are apps already.
So, because I was thinking where this could be, and it's something you said that prompted this, where this could be really useful could be over a week in a large organization, just over a week to monitor this. And then, of course, you don't need the conversations, you don't need anything. And then you have just some really huge data that you can look at and a good snapshot of a lot of people. But at the granular level, which is what they're suggesting here, which is, I have lots of problems. There's also something else in this article, and it reminds me now. I'm going to go off on one. Sorry, listeners, which is how the media is driving the conversation a lot of the time. The mainstream media, at the bottom of this is also a photo of Yonder Desk, which is a little bit like a 3D Sokoko for listeners who've been with us for a very long while. It's an office plan, and the office can be designed to replicate exactly a company's real one, or have a completely different
that's
design.
What we're missing.
Yeah. So I think that again, it's this. I think it's very easy to become obsessed with like one thing, or how do we make this the easiest as possible? So how do we know how people are feeling in the most easiest way? Give them a button to press. So
and it's not easy. It's complicated. You know, this is the hardest bit, and you can't relegate it to buttons.
Yeah.
One for happy, one for sad. God, everybody's emotions are more complicated than that.
That's the thing. So hurrah if anyone is using it in a way that is really giving them information that they cannot get any other way. But let's make sure we're using it for something that we really are making the world a better place. And I am hoping that this is not a yes and or. Sorry, that is something in between. And I just wonder we'll just see how these wristbands do. So let's carry on with the tech conversation, which is not the more fluffy part of it. You suggested this article, which is actually from last year, but that I think I'd completely missed, Maya. And it's called...
Yeah, I missed it too. This one from Trello.
Yes, it's called "The Future of Trello is on the Horizon. Take a Sneak Peek," and it's by Michael Pryor. I don't know if he's called CEO. He used to be CEO of Trello. I don't know how he sits now with the whole Atlassian thing. And it's from 26th of October 2020. And what does this tell us, Maya?
Well, it tells us about quite a lot of changes within Trello, which we use all the time. In fact, we use it to plan this podcast, and using it for all sorts of different things. Trello is clearly evolving to put much more functionality and to become much more of a project management tool. So that's interesting on the tech front. But it's also, I quite like the way they contextualized this article, announcing that by talking about their own way of hybrid working and how they're using their own tools to get through the pandemic and to build the changes that they think people want to see. I mean, I don't know if we need all this in Trello from a functionality point of view. I think a lot of people go for the simplicity of Trello because it's just these cards that you pick up and move around.
Yes.
We don't need it to be Microsoft Project. But, clearly there's a convergence and everybody's trying to fill the gaps that they're seeing within the need for digital tools to kind of extend in directions that you might go with them after you've picked them up. You might find that you need that, to track things in terms of critical path or who's responsible for what and resources and things. So now you can do all that in Trello. So that's interesting. But luckily, it's still got the functionality that we know and love of just picking cards up and moving them around.
Yeah, I found it. Welcome, Chainsaw. Guest number one was our dog.
Sorry about that. Yeah.
So I looked at it because I had this completely passed me by, and I haven't seen any changes on our own board or anything, which is great.
We're not really doing this, are we? I mean, we think we managed to just manage a whole podcast with people in different countries just by one card per episode.
But I'm glad about that because sometimes with some other apps we might have seen a change when we didn't need it. And I know that some of this is only being rolled out to the business and something, and we still have the free account, to be honest. So thank you, Trello. That's why we talk about you, Trello. It's wonderful. But it does remind me of Asana, which I've started to look at because one of the teams I'm working with chose that. It was Asana versus Trello. And I was a great facilitator. I didn't say anything. I gave them the pointers. No, in fact, what I did with them, and this is an interesting exercise. Maybe I'll share it with you now, Maya, and maybe it's of use to listeners. I was I came into this team to create a team agreement. They'd never stopped and talked about this before, even though they've been using tech for a while, but in a co-located manner. And I was talking about, okay, maybe we need to decide between some apps. And someone in the team said, actually, what I'd prefer is a criteria for choosing those apps. I thought, that's
Brilliant.
great. Thank you. We'll take that one. And I asked them to, instead of saying, okay, let's look at this criteria, I gave them an exercise to choose the criteria if they were choosing a restaurant for a meal. The idea being that I didn't want them to start referring to criteria of apps they already had and used and pull from that. So I didn't want them to reverse engineer their choices. So we started with the restaurant ideas and what the meals were, and then we just made the parallels. So, okay, like location, excellent. It's easy to use, it's got good customer service, stuff like that.
Yeah, I really like that.
Yes. And then they were left with different people. Some people were using Trello, some were using Asana. And I don't know how they made their choice because they did it by themselves. And we've looked at Asana. And I went in and I was a little bit like, oh my God, this is lots of stuff. Luckily, Morgan Legg is a Asana ambassador. She's been on the show before, at least once, if not twice, I think. And yeah, so she's helping me a bit. But then when I went and looked at this Trello, I thought, oh, that's just like Asana. So interesting that, I suppose the simpler tools need to evolve also for the people who want to stay with them.
And they're kind of, they're starting to overlap each other's space. And also visually, this whole kind of pastel corporate Memphis bubbly faces, it's all just becoming, I can't tell one app from another anymore. It's like all the Google apps rebranding into these orange and green and blue icons, and I can't see what's what on my toolbar any longer. I'd love somebody to do something that just visually is completely different, but that the direction of travel seems to be about convergence at the moment, and they're all doing things that each other's do in slightly different ways. It actually makes it harder to choose a tool set if you're starting from scratch. I like your restaurant exercise to really make people step back from defending their pre-existing choices to really thinking at a very high level about functionality and what they want it to do, because it's no longer obvious anymore. Well, if you're setting up, you need X, Y, and Z.
Yeah. And you're right that if they all converge, it's more difficult to choose, actually. I hadn't thought of that. Okay, before I go off on a moaning one, Zoom also, which we have been loving and loving for ages, and which is still, it's just great. Well done, guys. They've got new studio effects. And I have to say, I'm not sure how I feel about this. I've been thinking about this. I'm just going to put my I don't know. I'm just going to be a bit stuck up at the moment because I'm thinking I do love that I look better on Zoom on video than in any other video app because they touch you up. But I'm also thinking, I don't know, if we're saying, oh, wasn't it so wonderful that we can really show up as ourselves and we can show our homes and and then we're starting to tweak ourselves in the camera. I don't know, maybe you feel differently.
I don't know. I mean, I think, we're going back to the piece we talked about earlier about maybe younger people feeling less happy working from home, and maybe anything that gives people a sense of control and self-expression. I think it is becoming part of the culture now. And if people want to just go, look like they've rolled out of bed in the morning and having a meeting just as they are, then fine. That should also be absolutely okay. But people do like to construct themselves and how they put themselves forward. And I think the sense that if you've got no choice about working from home at the moment, it can feel really intrusive that there's these glimpses of your home and your life and you as you really look rather than how you've put your face on for work. And so anything that gives back a little bit of that feeling of being in control of it, whether it's putting a virtual background on or putting a filter on or whatever, then it's pretty harmless, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right. I'm being a bit but just use the tech for whatever helps you. Yes.
I saw something, so shoot off on a tangent. I was watching some UK TV the other day and I saw an advert for, it was some kitchens, I think, and it was somebody in a meeting at home and she was embarrassed about the state of her kitchen, put a virtual background on, and then she got a new kitchen and so she took her background off and then everybody else put their backgrounds on because they were so shamed by her gorgeous new appliances. And I just thought that is so pandemic 2020 work from home peak cultural expression, that this has now made its way into the culture of adverts for kitchens, that we feel we've got to show off some beautiful backdrop of our homes. So if that's really how people are being made to feel, then you should be able to do what you like with your Zoom settings.
Yes. So the studio effects, for those that haven't seen them yet, they're actually, so you've got the comedy things that you can put on your piggy nose and your whatever, or show yourself as if you're in a theater, all of that's there. But now these are basically, they're like lipstick or eyebrows, and they do look amazing, as in, wow, you can't tell that it's something that the tech has put on you. So listeners, if you want to exploit, if you want to learn how to exploit a lot of the video settings, Maya, through Happy Home Working, that's how it's called, isn't it? Yes.
Healthy.
Sorry.
I want you to be both healthy and happy.
Healthyhappyhomeworking.com. Okay, so that's it. Through that, she has put together a video which to help you to tweak your settings so you don't look like a zombie.
We don't go into the lipstick or anything like that, but more just about your lighting,
the more
and
natural,
how to use the simple filters and things in Zoom video settings. Yeah.
Even better. And once you know how to do that, then you can look for everything else that they keep adding, because this is the thing, they keep adding. So follow the link in the show notes. You do need to sign up, but then you are signed up to the mailing list of Healthy Happy Home Working. So that is not a bad thing at all. So yeah, Maya, you will put the link for listeners.
With pleasure.
Excellent. So let's wrap up this tech session with something that, to be honest, it's a half-baked thing. I haven't looked into it properly because it's the last minute, but it's Microsoft Viva, which is, we've got the rise of the employee experience platform, and this is now going beyond helping people do their work. They're now looking at something that we know has been at the front of people's minds, which is company culture. Have you got more information than I have, Maya, on this?
I don't have a lot. This is very new. This is obviously Microsoft have been working on this for a while, but the conversation has only really started to emerge. And it's an interesting intersection of all these different trends, and particularly for large organizations, just how you kind of feel about the digital workspace as a destination and a repository of information and an asset. And even the focus on employee experience is something that's really emergent, I think, because it was, before you just went to work and did your work, but the sense that you have to build a better experience and sense of connection and culture into the digital platform is really new. And I think it's really encouraging. I don't know if Microsoft have got it right yet. I don't have direct experience of this yet. But I think it's really exciting that this emphasis is going there and really trying to put another layer on between the things that we need, like how we communicate and how we collaborate on documents and things like that, to kind of put that cultural and experiential layer in. I'm not sure how it's going to look and feel, but I really like the intention.
Yeah. And like them or not, their staff, their company, whatever, they listen a lot. Sometimes I think they listen too much to what people want, but never mind.
Yeah.
They've got a really big business. I haven't. So I think that. But yes, there is a PDF that I downloaded. I think someone we quoted, I forget his name. There's just too many people worth remembering their names around. But we quoted him in a LinkedIn article last episode of What's Going On, I think. He shared this. It's a PDF called The People-Powered Workplace, Reimagine the Employee Experience. It's like a 7-minute estimated time read. I've never seen that before in a PDF. Estimated time read, 7 minutes.
Oh, what does that say about our attention spans, that we have to have that on everything?
It's funny that, to know how long it's going to...
It's only 7 minutes of your life if you read quite fast.
But it looks at communications, company resources, insights, knowledge, communities, well-being, growth and development. So have a look. Listeners, if any of you have more insight on this, let us know. Send us a note, whatever, virtualnotdistant.com, or you can email me directly, pilar@virtualnotdistant.com. Maybe we'll have a look at it, and if it's interesting, we shall talk more about it. We'll see.
It would be great to talk to someone who's actually using this and see what difference it's making in your workplace when you start to roll out some of this stuff. How does it change the way you do your work, particularly in Teams, which seems to be where a lot of it is sitting?
Yeah. So do get in touch, and of course, any conversation around culture and looking after it in a deliberate way does lead us to our in-house podcasting for connection services that we are soft launching for months because we can't do a proper launch because everything just keeps happening. So yes, if you are thinking of ways of amplifying your culture, or in fact even just keeping people connected away from their computer and away from video, then let me know, and we'll see how we can help through an in-house podcast, which I can tell you more if you want.
Yeah, but I think it is worth just mentioning that, to remember that there are so many different ways to do culture. It's great that Microsoft, as sort of the biggest platform in the world, is getting behind this from a very corporate perspective and giving people these tools. But there are lots of other ways that people can connect and reflect the culture that they want to nurture in their organization. Podcasting for connection might be more appropriate for you.
Yes. And if you're listening to this, maybe it is. So we have segued into the news from Virtual Not Distant. That was it. That's why I used it there. So I wanted, actually, we do have a blog post on culture coming up soon. At some point it will get published. But there's a couple of other pieces of content that I would like to refer listeners to. One of them came up from the question that Becky posted on LinkedIn, which was if you had, let me see if I can remember, if you had a friend who, a business owner who decided to go remote and they were to open their laptop on Monday morning at 9 a.m., what advice would you give them? And of course, this is all about giving advice to someone who's who's decided to go remote. And the answers on LinkedIn were I just think they were so good and so concise, but so broad and holistic that we've put them in a blog post so that they don't get lost in LinkedIn. So excellent. Yeah, I really like that. And to be honest, it gave me the opportunity to send private messages to people who I hadn't talked to for ages, just to ask them, just to say, we're going to do this. Is that okay? Of course, they all said yes. So that was a nice listeners. It's nice
just
excuse.
Looking through this thread, it's like a bit of almost a who's who of remote.
Yes, it's nice.
Excellent.
It's really nice. So yes, and then there's an article that I co-wrote with Simon Wilson, who's an IAF facilitator. And I say I co-wrote, but actually he wrote most of it. And I then went in and asked some questions. And it's interesting because it's a piece about using asynchronous communication and the asynchronous space, but as a facilitator. So not as a team member or a manager, actually as someone who goes in and helps a group through some kind of process. So I'm just looking for, I just wanted to give you the title, Making the Most of Virtual Facilitation Using the Asynchronous Space. So this might be useful for facilitators who are used to coming in, and of course, any kind of facilitation, even if it's done in a meeting over a day, wherever, it's always got a pre and post process, but that is rarely visible to everyone taking part. And what Simon is thinking is that actually we can now really extend and really use that space before the asynchronous space to really feed into the meeting, and also for the meeting to then feed into another asynchronous space afterwards. And I keep thinking that it's a wonderful opportunity for external facilitators, because usually when you work with a group, you talk to the stakeholders, to the main client, then you join the group, and then that's it. But if you can be allowed to go into their communication space, whether it's a Slack or a Microsoft Teams or a whiteboard that you used with them before, it's almost like you're invited into their space. Yeah. And you can observe them in their medium rather than in the equivalent of being away somewhere else that's not their office. So I think there's a lot of potential in there.
Yes, and I thought this article would definitely be of interest, not just to professional facilitators, but anybody who's working with groups, including their own group, and just in terms of thinking about how to use the synchronous and asynchronous tools together to make a much more kind of multidimensional interaction. It doesn't have to revolve around a specific point in time, but there are so many different tools and modalities we can use now to make it richer.
Great. Well, I'm glad you saw that. So there we go, listeners. Well, everyone's welcome in the article. Oh, excellent. I hadn't thought of that. Excellent. And then I think that's all the virtual not distant news. But then, of course, we've got two communities that we want to showcase, that we want to introduce you to listeners. We don't have our own community, but we do have plenty of other places to connect with us. And I will roll those out at the end of the episode. But Maya, you are building a community for home workers on Facebook. Tell us about that.
Well, yes, this is part of the Healthy, Happy Homeworking movement. We've got the books and there's going to be some training coming up later this year. But around that, I really wanted to just create a place where people could go and talk and share, because we have this emerging demographic of reluctant home workers and people who are not having the quality experience we want them to, as we were talking about at the top of the show. So it's just a community of people coming together, a mixture of employees and self-employed people, and sharing tips and best practice. And there are people who've got particular expertise in there, like we've got a declutterer and a physiotherapist who's been giving people some advice about workstations and things like that, very practical things. And other times we're talking about much more abstract aspects of culture and communication. So everybody's welcome. If you're on Facebook, I mean, we did it there because a lot of people are, and it's easier to go where people already are. So it's just Facebook groups and then Healthy, Happy Homeworking, but we can put a link in the show notes and everybody's welcome.
Excellent. And I love that now we have a choice of where people meet, like where you can create a community or bring people together online. So we've got Facebook, a slightly different one. And these are not virtual, not distant spaces, but they're connected. They're connected personally and they're connected in subject also. So the other one I wanted to refer listeners to is the Work-Life Psych Club. And this is on a different platform. So just talking tech a bit. Richard has built it on Mighty Networks, which is also where Judy Reese has also built a community there. And
right.
Excuse me, listeners. And also Repeople, the Nacho, is also building there. So it's a nice new platform, Mighty Networks. And basically, it's work-life psych. And of course, Richard is an organizational psychologist, Dr. Richard McKinnon, and he talks about the psychology of the workplace. So much broader over there. So yes, www.worklifepsych.club. And don't forget the 3 W's, because else you won't get there. So as I was saying, we're going to wrap up, but Maya, anything you want to say to listeners before we wrap up this episode, another very long episode, because there's so much going on.
There really is. And I know we said that we try to keep these themes evergreen. And it's, I suppose what's I've been thinking about as we wrap this up is that the themes are evergreen, but the space is moving so fast and the conversation around each of them. So hopefully this will still be of value whenever you listen to it. But it's going to be an interesting year. We keep saying that.
Oh yes, let's not hope that we end up about it being an interesting decade at this pace. But anyway, let's not end on that low note. Let's end on the high note that we are here for you, listeners. If you want to not just give us feedback on the show, which we're always we'd love to hear from you. I think we've got quiet listeners. Although I have to say, I have heard from some listeners recently, so that was really nice. Please say hello. And we do have lots of places for you to stay in touch with us, even without interacting with us. So you can be a silent consumer of what we have to say, and you are very welcome to do that, because that's why we put all our stuff out. So remember that if you are not subscribed to the show on your favorite podcast app, whatever that is, then the name of this show is 21st Century Work Life. And you can sign up to our monthly newsletter over at virtualnotdistant.com, which has reading and listening recommendations. And there it's also got a digest of our content. So any content we put out, you will get in that monthly newsletter. If you're on LinkedIn, then follow us there. We have a page. On Twitter, we are at Virtual Teamwork with a 0 instead of an O. And finally, if you are if you want to fire up an email, as they say, then Pilar, Pilar, at virtualnotdistant.com. And listeners, thank you very much for listening, because we are aware that there is a lot of content out there around the world of work, around online collaboration, leading remote teams, etc., etc. There are also some really good podcasts out there. So we are really, really thankful that you're sticking with us. And if there's anything that you want us to cover, then let us know. For now, thank you for listening. A big thank you for listening to the 21st Century Work-Life podcast produced by Virtual Not Distant. If you have something to add to the conversation, let us know through the contact form over at virtualnotdistant.com. I have been your host, Pilar Orti, and I'm signing off now. Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, enjoy.